Blessings, good evening. We have a few questions have come in, so make an effort to answer them. First question tonight. Ajahn, I have not meditated for the last few days because of my shoulder pain. How can I meditate with the pain? Well, we often will have aches and pains from illness, from injury, just from aging. This is very normal for human life, isn't it? To have a totally pain-free day is probably quite rare. Fortunately, much of the pain we experience is very brief, passing. We just get used to it, tolerate it. But from time to time, more serious, intense pain, longer-lasting, painful feelings come up. And the whole point of pain is that it's unpleasant. So it's a big part of meditation is learning how to be mindful of painful feelings. It's one of the 5 khandhas, the feeling khandha, Vedana khandha. So nowadays they translate Vedana as the tone of your experience. Whatever you're experiencing through your eyes, ears, tongue, nose, skin, and that includes the body within as well, and then the mind itself. And we have pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling, originating from the physical form, the body, and then from the mind, from mental states. So Vedana, pleasant, painful or neutral, arises as a result of past actions. It's karma generated. So although some Vedana is just kind of the general karma of being born as a human being, because human bodies and minds are sensitive, so you'll be experiencing these 3 kinds of Vedana all the time anyway, as a human being. But some in particular are generated from specific kinds of karma in the past. But most people won't remember or know what the karmic origin was, what action or what you did, what intentional action you did in the past has led to this karma arising. Sometimes we do know, but much of the time we don't know. But the more you investigate the teaching of karma, cause and result, actions have consequences, pleasant and unpleasant, the more you can see it at work, I think you could say. That's my experience. And so then you may come to realize that you have a pain such as shoulder pain. Well, there may be some karma in the past. There may be an initial cause, so like it could just arise from the way you lie down to sleep at night. You can get all kinds of aches and pains that can last a long time. Or from some injury, doing some activity. That's the sort of immediate cause, but there may also be previous causes that this is the result of, such as karmic acts, such as harming animals is a very common one, that gives rise to aches and pains, painful feelings as the karmic result. So perhaps that's what this is. But anyway, in terms of practice with painful feelings, well, because they're painful, they're unpleasant in their nature, we do need to begin perhaps with the quality of patience, endurance towards the painful feelings we experience. And particularly when you strip away distractions. So like when you come to meditate, pain can be a big obstacle because straight away you're becoming aware of painful feelings in your body and also mental pain with very little distraction. Because if you're meditating, you're not doing anything else other than turning your attention on your own five khandhas, your body, your mind. So painful feelings can seem worse than normal or more overwhelming because you feel like you can't get away from them. Partly that's because perhaps mindfulness, the quality of mindfulness, which is very, it brings with it equanimity, a detached awareness where you're not, when you're knowing an object, such as a painful feeling, but without adding on through a lot of mental proliferation or creating moods and moods of suffering based on that painful feeling. You're just aiming to know it with mindfulness. So when you can know it, then it's quite possible to be with a certain amount of pain and maintain mindfulness. And that's not being in a deep state of samadhi, it's just maintaining enough basic mindfulness from moment to moment for the mind not to go into a lot of mental proliferation due to this painful feeling you're experiencing. But there'll be a point where the pain increases and you find it very difficult to be mindful of that feeling or to even just sit in meditation, as you're saying. It can become so painful you don't want to sit there with it. It's too much. So you can try other forms of meditation perhaps. It's one thing, maybe walking meditation as opposed to sitting with pain. We also encourage maybe trying to be mindful of another meditation object and basically ignore the pain if you can. So mindful of the breath, in-breath and out-breath. And you'll notice when you're successful with being mindful of in-breath and out-breath, you don't pay any attention to painful feelings around the body. And sometimes even serious painful feelings you can ignore. But again, sooner or later, painful feelings will re-emerge into your consciousness and you can't stay with your meditation object. Then it may be just more about endurance, and you have to consider how much you can endure for how long and what it's doing to your mind. Generally, painful feelings endured will give rise to some mental anguish, discomfort, agitation of mind. So you have to manage that and not overdo it, because that can make you very depressed or averse to the whole thing of meditation, being mindful and so on. So you have to go gently, slowly, see how much you can maintain your mindfulness even when pain is coming into consciousness from an injury or something. Just see how you can go. Until maybe one day you might have better skills with samadhi and you can perhaps enter samadhi, a state of samadhi, using a meditation object. You've developed a skill at being mindful of the breath, say, and you may be able to just enter a state of calm on your meditation object, even when you're ill or in pain. And many meditators do that and then contemplate, because they've developed mindfulness, state of calm, then they use that state of calm to contemplate pain, contemplate feelings of tiredness and so on, or the symptoms of illness, aches and pains around the body. When I say contemplate, I mean look at them in the light of impermanence, dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, and anatta, not self. So to maintain enough mindfulness so that wisdom can investigate, the wisdom faculty of the mind can investigate. This mind is steady enough to see painful feelings arising, ceasing, to see the unsatisfactory nature of painful feeling that does arise and cease, and is a conditioned thing. It arises, it ceases according to causes and conditions, and it's not a self, it's not permanent. And the more mindfulness you have, you can see how painful feeling comes up, intensifies, sometimes it disappears from your experience, so it's subject to change. And you may also have this sense of separation between feeling and the mind that knows the feeling. See it as not self. So learning to deal with pain, to be patient with it, to establish mindfulness with it, and then investigate it can be a great cause for insight and understanding of the process of craving and attachment, how it affects the mind. But you also have to be very patient with painful feeling because it's unpleasant. And we wish you well, and also you can use compassion, kindness and compassion for yourself when you have pain. Find those thoughts, those positive emotions or feelings that help to calm you down and bring a more positive attitude to the painful feeling you're experiencing. So that even if you can't get rid of the painful feeling, you can develop a more positive attitude, how to live with it and tolerate it and be at peace with it, especially if you can't get rid of it. If it keeps returning, then if you can maintain the kindness for yourself as one human being with this painful feeling, this will help you. Next question. Dear Lumpur, I hope this message finds you well. I am curious about your perspective on the Abhidhamma. Some friends have been exploring the Pa-Auk Sayadaw tradition, finding it to offer deeper insights compared to other traditions. They suggest that even sutta teachings incorporate concepts from the Abhidhamma, leading them to believe that delving into Abhidhamma could provide a closer understanding of the Buddha's teachings. What are your thoughts on this? Well, really there's only one Buddhist tradition, and that is the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path that is for the end of suffering, that leads to the end of suffering. Each teacher, each tradition, from country to country, monastery to monastery, will have their own style, emphasis, different reflections that a particular teacher has found beneficial in the course of their practice. But there's only really one path. That's the Noble Eightfold Path, Sila, Samadhi and Panya. And it's a question for each individual how well, obviously in the beginning we do depend on our teachers a lot, and it's of great benefit when you have a teacher, a skilled teacher. But in the end we have to develop the qualities ourselves through our own practice. So in the bottom line, in the end, it's whether you are putting these teachings into practice, whether you're cultivating the Noble Eightfold Path or not, in whatever tradition or whatever your background. So, and whether you're Burmese tradition, Sri Lankan, Thai, Tibetan, Chinese, whatever the cultural background, it's maybe that's only a factor. I mean, it's something to obviously consider, your cultural conditioning, cultural background, the way we chant, the way we teach, the emphasis in meditation and so on. But in the end, it's each individual, what efforts are they making in their practice to cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path, to bring it up in their heart. So it's not just what you believe in, it's not just the books you read, the talk to you here, but it's what are you doing in your own practice? How are you bringing the teachings of the Four Noble Truths into your heart and developing some insight into them? So any tradition that promotes that, the cultivation of the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, can be a successful tradition in terms of teaching Buddhism to enlightenment. But it's up to each individual what they make of the teachings they're presented, how well they use them, how much effort they put in. So I'm sure there are very good practitioners in Burma, in Sri Lanka, in Thailand, in Laos, Cambodia, Tibet, China, Taiwan, Mahayana traditions as well as Theravada traditions. But again, it comes back to the individual. And that partly will also depend on what you find you have an affinity with. So some people may find the Abhidhamma teaching, studying the Abhidhamma, listening to it, recollecting it, and contemplating it helps them. So they do go into that, and there are many traditions in most of these countries, Theravada countries and Mahayana countries, will have teachers who can teach you about the Abhidhamma, the background of it, explain it further, using both the Abhidhamma Pitaka and then the commentaries. But who studies and practices and how much is an individual thing, I think. And some people benefit, and their character benefits from more study of the suttas, the Abhidhamma, the Vinaya. Some people study less, and they read enough, hear enough to go off and do their meditation. And that applies to both lay people and monastics, monks and nuns. Some people find it very joyful to study, gives them confidence, gives them understanding. Others study just enough and they prefer to practice mindfulness, sila, samadhi, panya in daily life without too much study. Or they study up to a point and then they put more effort into developing direct insight from their meditation and the training of the mind. So there really is no one answer to this. You have to get to know your character and then look at the results of your practice. And study of texts, whether it's Buddha Vachana, the word of the Buddha, or commentaries, can have drawbacks. One can become too attached to the words and the concepts, and often the telltale sign of that is one becomes a little conceited and attaches to the knowledge from the text rather than direct knowledge from one's own experience in meditation. And sometimes being attached can give rise to conceit, strong opinions. One can become argumentative, look down on. Sometimes people with a lot of textbook knowledge can look down on someone who has less textbook knowledge, even though the one with less textbook knowledge might actually have gone further in their practice. And I've witnessed that on occasions where someone with a lot of learning, which is a good thing, it's not a bad thing, but without the development of insight into the attachment to the five khandhas to match the learning, they've ended up being critical of another person who's practiced and abandoned many defilements, but are not able to express themselves maybe so well. They don't have enough textbook knowledge. Especially the older generation of monks and nuns in Thailand often didn't receive a lot of formal education. Maybe they left school at the age of 11, didn't read so much, there weren't so many books and texts available, so they put a lot more effort into basic meditation practice, samatha vipassana perhaps, and some of them had amazing endurance, put forth amazing effort, with very little background knowledge. Generally in Theravada Buddhist countries there is a standard of education of monks and nuns, most people will have a basic understanding of suttas, concepts, from the suttas, the Vinaya, and even the Abhidhamma sometimes. And some people really don't develop that knowledge very far because they go off and meditate, and they may even become enlightened without knowing or reading, studying much about the Abhidhamma. But if they become enlightened, they free their mind from greed, anger and delusion, they will understand that Abhidhamma, as soon as you present it to them, they will understand it, whether it's true or not, whether it makes sense or not, because if they've purified their mind from greed, anger and delusion, and they know how they did that, then they will understand any Buddhist text quite well, even though they may not have previously read it or be able to quote it in the way scholars can. So sometimes I talk about Lumpur Sangwan. It's one monk who had hardly any formal education as a layperson. Then he entered the Sangha. He could barely read or write, but he had a lot of faith, and he put his effort into learning. He learned chanting and reciting reflections and suttas and parittas by listening to other people and reciting along with them, so he could chant and recite some basic texts, but he couldn't read much. He hadn't learned to read when he became a monk. So he went off into the forest, and we believe he became enlightened. And he used to visit Ajahn Chah regularly, and Ajahn Chah praised him, and many other teachers, Ajahn Mahabua as well, they all praised him as a well-practiced monk. But he only learned to read and write later in life. So he wasn't an expert in the texts. He couldn't quote and explain them at length, but he knew enough basics to talk Dhamma with his students. I went to see him many occasions, and he could talk Dhamma very well, but he actually only read the Tripitaka, the Buddhist text, later in life. And he said after he had had his realizations and enlightenment experience, he went back to learn to read and write, and then check himself from the text to see that everything he said was in line with what the Buddha said. So there are those practitioners who do it that way around. They practice first and then go back and read the text later. Probably more common is people will study texts, listen to talks first and practice later. But one danger is you spend your whole time studying and reading and remembering and learning and never move into practice stage. Or when you move into practice of meditation, spend your whole time comparing your meditative experience of samatha, samadhi, insight. You're comparing what is coming up in your mind with what you've read, what you've remembered. And there's even a danger that you're trying to fit experiences with concepts and then make pronouncements, oh, this is jhana, or this is insight, this is one of the 9 vipassana jhanas. And there's a danger, I'm not saying everyone does this, but there's a danger of trying to fit your experience to the books. And sometimes people do that too much. Of course, the other danger of not studying at all is that you just don't understand what the Buddha taught, don't understand the method, the path, and that's also a danger. So each individual has to look for themselves where they need to improve either the study or, more likely, probably more commonly, the amount of practice they do. Direct meditation, samatha, vipassana meditation. I think most people are lacking in that. They don't do it enough. So we all have to reflect for ourselves on what we're doing, how much we study, how much we meditate, how much we develop the actual qualities of the Eightfold Path, as opposed to just read about them, talk about them. Next question. Dear Lumpur, thank you for your teachings. I wish you well. Thank you. Is it possible for a lay practitioner who is living in the world to catch a glimpse of nibana? If so, does it mean that he or she is at least a Sotapanna? Thank you. Living in the world, is it possible to catch a glimpse of Nibbana? Sounds like sort of the mountains here. There's Mount Donabuang up the road. It's the tallest mountain in the Yarra Ranges, and it's sometimes shrouded in mist or clouds, and so the clouds part. You catch a glimpse of it, and then the clouds go back, and you don't see it. So catching a glimpse of Nibbana sounds like that, doesn't it? Something high and distant and hard to see. You could say, yes, Sotapanna is one way they define it, don't they? They say the Sotapanna has had penetrating insight into the Four Noble Truths, the conditioned nature of existence, the conditioned nature of their body and mind, 5 khandhas. The view of the Sotapanna has changed. They no longer take their 5 khandhas as a permanent self or being or entity. They now understand body, feelings, perceptions, thought formations, sense consciousness are conditioned things that arise and pass away according to causes and conditions. They understand that. Their view has changed. And they'll have had a glimpse of Nibbana, the separation of what you might call the mind that just knows, the natural mind that is not defiled from the 5 khandhas which are defiled. And the seeing of, the 5 khandhas which are clung to, and that is defilement, that's attachment. They'll have seen that, seen through the deluding nature of craving and attachment. So they'll have seen what is not craving and attachment, meaning a glimpse of Nibbana. So we do use the term glimpse of Nibbana. Ajahn Chah once said, well, if you've attained samatha, to the meditation to the level of jhana, where all the 5 hindrances disappear temporarily from the mind is in a very pure, bright, one-pointed state. It's not Nibbana, but it's like a taste of Nibbana. So even if one is not a Sotapanna, one has not attained stream entry, it's still possible to attain one-pointedness in samadhi. Have a glimpse of the mind that is pure from the 5 hindrances, and that can give one this very important or profound insight into stillness, the peaceful, quiet, still mind. Then to practice vipassana and develop insight into the 3 characteristics of impermanence, unsatisfactoriness and not self is very effective, because once you've experienced stillness of samatha, of samadhi, then the delusions of seeing things as permanent, satisfying and as self becomes exposed very quickly when you contemplate. It's not a guarantee. Many people have attained jhana but not attained Margapala Nibbana, not become enlightened. But if one is trained, has a good teacher, and one is training in vipassana, in insight meditation as well, it will be a tremendous boost towards Nibbana, towards insight into the emptiness of conditions, physical and mental phenomena. It's not a guarantee, but it is a very important step. But traditionally speaking, we say the Arya Pugala, a stream enterer, a once returner, non-returner, or the Arahant are the ones who have had any direct experience of Nibbana, the unconditioned, the knowing without any sense of self, any delusion. That's the normal way of defining it. Arya Pugalas from Sotapanna upwards. Last question today. Luang Por, how do you interpret the 6th precept not eating after midday when taught and practiced in the 8 precepts. So as you're mostly aware, I would have thought, the 8 precepts are used for anyone staying in a monastery, say. That's the basic requirement at this monastery for someone who stays overnight or comes on retreat, is to undertake the 8 precepts, and retreat centers and retreats are usually the same. Monasteries, retreats, generally 8 precepts are the basic rules of training you take on. So that's the 5 precepts that all Buddhists should aspire to in their daily life, even if they're a family person working, living out in the world. But 8 precepts, lay people out in the world can take them on for shorter or longer periods, but in the monasteries in particular and in retreat situations, people tend to undertake the 8 precepts. So that's the 5 precepts, plus the 6th precept is to not eat after midday, or literally not eat at the wrong time, which is considered after midday. So then that brings up the question, well, what is eating? Is that anything at all? Well, water is allowed 24 hours a day. And then based on the monastic training, the Vinaya, we have things we call lifetime medicines. So a lay person on 8 precepts would still be able to, like the monks, take what we call lifetime medicines after afternoon. So that can include things like medicines from a pharmacy, or medicinal substances that are considered effective in dealing with particular illness and ailments. And so some of those can even appear more like foodstuffs. So something like the laxative kinds of fruits and leaves you get in Thailand and around other parts of the world are considered allowable afternoon. Could be prunes and many herbal substances, herbal medicines. That includes tea and coffee, cocoa. So we're actually allowed dark chocolate. The monks' Vinaya also allows for 5 what we call 7-day medicines, meaning substances that you can have offered and then keep for up to 7 days. And that includes oil and different kinds of vegetable oil, sugar, honey, and something we call nawanitang, which has been nowadays interpreted as cheese. And in the time of the Buddha, a certain kind of cheese was considered medicinal, something you gave someone who was very ill, couldn't eat properly maybe, but needed some energy. So could be given cheese in the evening. That's been taken to any form of cheese these days by many Sangha members, so that passes on to lay people keeping the 8 precepts. They're allowed cheese, but some monasteries don't allow that. They don't agree that what we call cheese in the modern era is allowable. Some do, some don't. So there's a little bit of variation between monasteries on what exactly is considered a medicinal requisite, an allowable afternoon. Obviously normal food is not allowable, solid food, normal food, but fruit juice, that as long as it's been strained of pulp, is allowable, and then these certain things just to help give one some energy or nutrition, basic sort of energy in the evening or when ill, when tired, when run down. So honey, sugar, fruit juice, herbal remedies and herbal drinks, and some people also include cheese there. So there's a fair amount of things you can have in the evening, afternoon, to give you strength, give you energy to practice, but no normal solid food is allowed afternoon. So that includes, say, milk, even though cheese as such is considered by many to be an allowable. Milk in other forms, say like milk chocolate, is not allowable, or milk drinks like Ovaltine or oat drinks and things like that are not allowable. So sometimes there's some misunderstanding here. People will have milk in their tea or coffee in the evening, but in our tradition, the forest tradition, that's not allowed. And then various food supplements sometimes taken are not really allowed, like oats and barley and various things. But if you're in a monastery or on a retreat, you should really consult the teacher to see what their standard is, and they will vary from place to place. The other thing that is important, well, this time period, we say afternoon, Vikala Bhojana. Vikala means the wrong time, taking things at the wrong time, or shouldn't be taken at the wrong time, meaning afternoon. But then people say, well, when is noon? And nowadays, of course, in Australia, we have daylight saving time half of the year, and then in the winter we have the normal time. So in daylight saving time, some people say, well, you can eat up until 1 p.m. rather than midday because of daylight saving. So that adds a further complication in countries that have different time zones at different times of the year. People will have to make an agreement. Many monks I know, they just take midday as their standard, but then another issue is the actual scientific or astronomical midday, according to the sun, solar midday, will vary as well. It's not according to the clock. The clock is a sort of Western invention. Sometimes the actual midday sun is at its highest point in the sky at 11:45 or 12:15. It can vary a little bit from day to day, month to month. So some people study this and they take that as the exact time of midday. Others just use the clock, so I tend to use the clock because it's convenient. So if it's midday, after midday I can't take normal foodstuffs. Before midday I can. So again, if you are on a retreat or in that sort of situation, well, consult the teacher and see what the standard is. And you learn, and then you adjust your lifestyle to suit that. So sometimes monks, maybe they're living in a very remote place and have to walk many hours to collect their alms food, and they don't have much time by the time they got their food and sit down. Maybe it's 11:40 or something, so they only have a little bit of time to eat their meal. That can happen, or when travelling also. And occasionally one is caught in a situation where the time has gone over midday and just one has to forfeit or sacrifice whatever food one's being offered that day, or just goes without. Occasionally that happens, but nowadays not very often, because there's usually people are available almost everywhere to provide food for monks and nuns. But it can happen, and so on. Other variations on this, say for Sangha, sometimes they take on an ascetic practice, a Tudonga practice, and that is, they call it the one sitter's practice. So they only eat before midday and at one sitting. So whether it's at 8 in the morning or 10 or 11, whatever, as long as it's before midday, they take their food that's offered and they'll just sit down and eat it as long as they're sitting, and then when they get up, leave that meal, leave their bowl behind, and they don't receive any more food after that. So that cuts out sort of extras coming from other people, or dividing the meal into 2 or 3 during the morning. They wouldn't do that if they're keeping that rule. So I often quote funny stories, like when monks keeping that rule and they're in the forest and they're having their meal and they've had one mouthful, and then an elephant walks by and the monk has to get up and move out of the way of this large dangerous elephant, but then they're keeping their rules, so they're keeping it strictly so they can't go back to their meal because they've stood up to get away from the elephant. So the elephant can ruin a good meal. So sometimes you get those funny situations. But generally it's normal food before midday for the sixth precept, and then only allowables after midday, and then just study up on what the allowables are, or ask if you're in doubt. So those are the questions tonight. We wish you well with your practice.